presentation is a massively condensed, very quick, high-level walkthrough on testing issues pertaining to testing SharePoint 2010. This is a condensed version of a session I gave recently at the SharePoint Saturday, New York City. So join along with me here. There's something here for everyone, regardless of your role. It's not just developer, but tester, BA, operations, stress testing, whatever type of testing you need to do with SharePoint. We'll cover it at a high level here and hopefully leave enough time also for your questions. So first of all, I'd like to thank ShopTalk, Arcovis, and Jamie's for having me here today, and happy to be with you. So I'll do some quick introductions. Why is SharePoint in particular difficult to test versus, say, any other custom developed web application like MVC or something? We'll look at the types of testing that we can do. It's not just code testing or unit testing. There's lots we can do. Unit testing is a particular concern in SharePoint, and we'll look at a mocking tool that addresses this, not one that makes fun of SharePoint, but one that helps us unit test SharePoint. And then we'll get into scenario testing with recorded web tests, and also stress testing with Visual Studio Ultimate, and then we can get into some Q&A. So first off, we're in Fusion. We're kind of all over the place, and I'm working out of the Toronto office. About me, I'm a SharePoint MVP. I just finished my chapter on Expert 2010 practices coming out from A-Press, and also working on another book too. I'm not finished the editing mode, but I'm getting into that. I'm also known as the .NET Ninja. That is me at the DevReach conference last year in my Ninja outfit. I will be speaking there again this year, so if you happen to be in Southern Europe at the end of October, please join me. And yes, I do have a black belt, but you know, if you want to moderate your questions more carefully, you know, that sort of thing, just let me know. Okay, so I want to focus on a real-world case study. It's the city of Lethbridge. That's the most recent public website I was involved with putting up. I was responsible for the testing of that, including the scenario testing to ensure, of course, that all the website functionality operated as we expected. We also had to stress test the solution in order to ensure the infrastructure met the non-functional requirements. And then, according to their experience with their web analytics from their previous site, they wanted to know how would the website perform given the set of web analytics and usage that they expected. And then they wanted to know, well, what's the peak load, so that we kind of can judge the capacity and we know what our server can take and when we may need to increase that. Where's Lethbridge? Well, if you look at a map of Canada here, it is just south of Calgary in Alberta, so just towards the border there. So you can go to lethbridge.ca if you wish. If you want to head off in your browser, it's lethbridge.ca. This is a sample screenshot I have up from a site at a point in time back in July. But it's a typical, what I'll say is a typical government website, a city website. So they're most concerned with the city's services that they can provide from three perspectives: being a resident, being a business in the city, or being a tourist, or perhaps looking at the city for potentially doing business with the city, or potentially visiting the city as a tourist as well. And again, importantly, what type of services the city government offers and what are the contacts and things like that. There are other typical features that you might find in many public websites. There's a news center. There's a calendar of events. There are career opportunities, for example. So just, you know, some web content around the career opportunities at the City of Lethbridge. Many online services provided through the website. You can pay your utilities online, get your dog license renewed, apply for your business through the website. And that being a SharePoint site, so why is it so difficult to test, given that it's a custom web application that we built? Well, first off, SharePoint is a product, and you don't have control of the implementation. So generally, given it's a web-based product, you can only test from the user interface perspective. There's a lot of configuration. For example, Laura does a lot of work in browser and with SharePoint Designer, and it's not really code, right? So, how do you test those sorts of things? Even with Visual Studio customizations, typically, to really do unit testing, you'd have to code in patterns that facilitate unit testing. So, of course, if you're doing an MVC app, Model View Controller application, ASP.NET MVC, no problem. The unit testing is built in. You can just, in fact, the project generates with a unit testing solution. And because of the MVC patterning, unit testing is very easy to do. So again, unless the developer is very disciplined in coding in something like Model View Presenter, it's going to be tough to test the code. But also, your testers, strangely enough, might not even have SharePoint installed to run unit tests against. So what can you do? What happens when the test involves the SharePoint sites or lists? Because you're going to test against certain data. How do you control that? So types of testing that we'll cover today are, so these are the categories of testing. So there's lots of categories of testing. So coverage testing is usually the testing that's done during the development phase. And types you might think of are unit testing, check-in tests, build verification, functional tests, and regression testing, just as examples. Then, as you finish the development phase and you move on to stabilization, you get into more of usage testing during the testing phase. So that's where you test user scenarios. You test performance. You do stress testing. Configuration testing might involve, different types of browsers. Does it work in this version of Firefox, that version of Chrome? And compatibility testing as well with maybe different back-end systems or integration points. So one way we can do unit testing is by using a professional tool, a mocking tool. You'll need to acquire one of these. And so how we, the developers, generally do testing is we'll do like mocks and stubs, right? So for example, if I just did one recently and it had nothing to do with SharePoint, the customer had a back-end DB2 database that we needed to return specific information for regarding vehicles, literally motorcycles in this case. So we had to retrieve vehicle information off their DB2 database. Well, I don't have a DB2 database handy, so I wrote a stub, actually a repository pattern that would allow me to switch it out to a little local SQL Server database I have that kind of has the same schema, so I can kind of plug that in and get data returned. So, so stubs are generally set in place to return the expected results, so typically data in that case, right? So I'm going to get back a set of vehicles. So mocks, on the other hand, involve testing the behavior of the code, the different code paths, where in this case, we don't actually care about the objects being real. So let me put this in context. If I have an algorithm that calculates payroll, I'm interested in testing the algorithm. I don't really care, I may have certain data where I want to test, I have test cases about full versus part-time employees, but I don't care about the SharePoint site part of it, or I don't care about having a real list on hand or real data. I just want to test the code paths. It's good, but it's generally doing mocks and stubs are generally only possible when you have you've written the code and you're in full control. So again, SharePoint being a product, you don't have, say, such good control over the SharePoint object model. So coding against that is notoriously difficult to actually unit test. The SharePoint object model has internal constructors, sealed classes, no interfaces. So it's notoriously there to try and get a hold of the SharePoint object model and do something with it. So TypeMock Isolator is a commercial product that you would purchase. And you will need such a mocking tool in order to do unit testing. Telerik also has one called Just Mock, but it doesn't matter, pick your tool. We can do the same types of things with it. So what this does is it gives you the ability to fake out SharePoint objects. So quite literally, you can create, you'll see a scenario where I don't care what the website is, or even if I have a SharePoint list, I just want to fake it out and run some code. And since I can create fake SharePoint anything, site collection sites, lists, so SP site, SP web, and SP list are typically things we want to fake out, you can run unit tests. You don't even need SharePoint. So this is good, by the way, for those testers who have to run particular test cases, and their job is to test the payroll calculation. Again, they don't care about the SharePoint aspects. So let me do, it's a really quick demonstration, like I could spend all day on this. So I'll just wait a second. I know it might take a second to refresh. But what we have here is just some random SharePoint code. But what I want you to note is that you can see that the code itself says for each SP list in the web. So for every SharePoint list in the web, it's going through and doing some stuff. So I've also got a routine here which will then, for a given task list, it will go through the lists and return to me the tasks that are marked urgent. So here it's going after SP list items. So you can see it's heavily using the SharePoint object model. And to test the code that, is the code properly looking at urgent tasks and returning them, you could think to test this that, okay, what do I need to do? I need to set up a site collection or a site. I need to have a tasks list with, I'll presumably, I'll pretend it's the out-of-the-box schema here, which it is. I need to populate it with the actual list with data. I need to put in task items in there, some of which are urgent and some of which are not. I need to come up with particular test cases to implement and then run this code against that SharePoint site, that SharePoint list, just so I can see if I get urgent tasks back or not. So I think this is the one here. Yes. So this is the unit test project. So this is literally just a unit test. This is a test method. And I want to test that routine which gets the urgent tasks for me. So I'll just take off the breakpoint for a sec so it might be easier to read. Jamie's, I just want to make sure that you were concerned, is the clarity of the screen fine? It's not blurry or?
It's clear, yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, good. So what we're doing here is with TypeMock Isolator, so it's this namespace called isolate, you literally create a fake instance of a site collection because I literally, it's a fake, it's just comes back, it looks to the code like it's a SharePoint site collection, but it's not a real one. It's a fake one. It looks exactly like an SP site to the code, but you'll notice it's not firing up a SharePoint site or a URL. You can keep going. So for example, after I got a fake site collection, within there I can create, so what are we creating here? You can create a fake task list, and look at this, keep going. Again, I'm not going to go through this in a bunch of detail, but take it for granted that what we're doing here is actually we created a fake task list, and we're creating fake task list items. But they are real from the perspective of the code. When the code goes to go through for each SP list item in the task list, to the code it will look like real tasks as if they had come from a SharePoint site. So they're fake, but they're real. Right? Kind of counterintuitive, but that's the way it is. And then once I've set up all the fake stuff, because I don't have a real SharePoint site, or I don't even care or want to take the time to set up a real SharePoint site to write the code against, I can take a sample set of tasks, run my tests to make sure that the two urgent tasks were to do the laundry and wash the dishes, although I think the dog would take priority at some point if it's sort of crossing its legs and whining at the door. But for sake of this example, the two important tasks are do the laundry and wash the dishes. We test that, and we're good. So, you know, I mean, I'll walk through the code very quickly here in terms of just, I mean, it doesn't do anything, unfortunately, but you will see that taking its time here. Oh, okay. I really did hit F5. So what I want to do is I'll also head into SharePoint Logic and just stop at Get Urgent Tasks. So you'll see, oops, sec. Okay, so we're at a breakpoint here. So I'm just going to step through the code. So I create a fake SB site, create a fake task list, set the urgent property, set up some actual tasks, and set the you know, get urgent tasks list, and then let's do some tests here. So you can see that the SharePoint code is firing. It's asking for a new SP site. And guess what? It gets one, even though for sure, I assure you, there is no SharePoint site on my machine called sharepoint.typemock.com. I could have put any URL in here at all. I go to open the web and open the task list, and it works. So what Isolator is doing is it's kind of this dependency injection. Every time the code asks for something SharePoint, it gives it something it thinks is real. Okay, and then it actually got a list of tasks from the fake stuff, and so I'm really and truly able to go through the list and look at the tasks that I had created in the previous code. Okay, so I think that is like super, super cool. Right, so sorry I didn't step through it, but I assure you it came back and my asserts worked. I got the right task back. So that's just like super cool. Okay. So now I want to, so you know, I'll just go away from a developer type of testing and look at scenario and stress testing. So we had all these website features to develop, news, calendar, job opportunities, those sorts of things. There were scenarios to perform from the point of view of the content author, as well as from the point of view of the public coming in, searching for career opportunities, you know, applying for one of the positions. So you want to test many scenarios from the user's point of view, again, the user being the public or being the content author. What we did initially was when we said, well, what does the public want to do on the website? We went to web analytics. So what we saw was that, I don't know, I'm just making this up, 10% of the people when they come to the website, they go to the events calendar and they look for the upcoming events. 15% of people, they come look at the recent news. 5% of people come and look at the job opportunities in the city, et cetera, et cetera. So what you do is you kind of get a 100% mix of the ratio of typical scenarios that the public would perform when they come to the website. So that's very important in setting up the different scenario tests. What we can do is, whether you've used Visual Studio Ultimate or not, like there's the Rational suite of tools, Rational Robot, and probably you guys can come up with 10 other web record and playback tools. So basically it'll follow along in the browser as you click through the browser, and it will record a script of that travel, and then it will play it back. You know, then you can just hit a play button and it will play back the very same scenario. So again, you can do that using a number of tools. I will be using Visual Studio Ultimate Edition to do that. Okay, so to record a web test. So I do have my site here. So I have my City of Lethbridge site on my development machine, and you know, I can travel to different things. So for example, I can have I can head off to the job opportunities here. And we all love virtual machines, don't we, developers? Sorry, I'm just increasing the resolution so we can see this better. We have job opportunities. We have upcoming events, and I put one in October. Sorry. I put one in October for DevReach. And in the news, I put in a SharePoint ShopTalk news item. So, you know, I put in some test data here, and I can start recording some testing scenarios. So in a test project, what I can do is I can use well, I can't see it because of my menu, but I can create a new test. And it's called a web performance test, but to me that's a little bit misleading because all it is going to be a record and a playback scenario. So you can see the recorder come in up here. And so what I do is I travel to my website, like I'm a member of the public. Oh, I can't type. You know what? I'm going to stop that just in case. You know, the web test would literally fail at that point, right? Silly me. Cancel. I'm just going to delete that one. Sorry about that. I will learn to type next time. Okay, so new test, web performance test. I'll make sure I type it correct. Okay, so you can see in the script here, it's actually following along here, you know, capturing everything that's going on here. It's kind of like Fiddler, you know, it's kind of like a Fiddler proxy. So, for example, I can go to the job opportunities section, and you know I can look at a job. So that's one of the things that the public is going to do. And then what I can do is simply stop that, and that script is now recorded as my web test. And what you can do, although you can play it back directly, but there's a lot you can do here in terms of it has generated a script. There's a lot of things you can do just with the scripting. Like, for example, if I had added a product to the shopping cart, then I would be able to create a script that would, you know, add different items to the shopping cart, or, you know, different quantities to the shopping cart. You know, so I can take one script and code up many scenarios out of it. I don't have to actually physically do every single action. So I'm going to record one more here. So test. You really want to get at my menu. Thank you. Okay, so new test. Web performance 2. Oh, I see. There's my bad typo. Okay. And I don't know, I'm going to do a different thing. I'm going to visit the news. And I'm going to look at this particular news item as my scenario number 2. And I'll say that's the end of that scenario. That could obviously be a lot more elaborate than that. So that will help you verify the different scenarios that the you know, for each requirement that you have captured, you can record these scenarios to prove that the requirements have been met. And as you make changes or updates to the features or the product, you can redeploy the changes and you can rerun these tests. Finally, one of my favorite things about Visual Studio Ultimate is when I do this new test here, like this is so cool. What I'm going to do is a load test, but again, it's a little bit misnamed because it's not just for load tests. Welcome to the wizard. So I'll call it whatever, scenario 1. First off, see that what this is going to do is run a set of tests. Run a set of these web tests that I've just recorded. And you can use recorded think times, or you can use a normal distribution centered on think times, or not at all. The first scenario says that, well, as I was actually recording the script and clicking through the website, you know, I stopped on each page for, I don't know, 2-3 seconds and continued on. So using the recorded think times would actually play it back at the same speed as a normal user would use the website. The do not use think times means almost like a robot hitting the site. It's going to just hammer the script in as fast as it can execute it. So 1 is more, to me, used for a scenario test, and number 2 would be used for a stress test or load test to see how much capacity the server can handle. Then you can have this machine, and if you can imagine me pointing at my laptop, this machine will generate a load of 25 users on the website. One little caution here, I can put in 10 million if I want, but I assure you this laptop does not have the resources or even network bandwidth to hit the server with real 10 million user load. If you want to do a real load test, what you would need is a lab. Like, so usually we would take over a training lab with like 10 computers in it, and I can actually use my workstation as the controller and slave out 10 computers, almost like doing literally a denial of service attack on the server. I slave out 10 computers, and I have each one of them represent 25 users, for example, to represent 250 concurrent users on the server, and that's literally a lot more realistic. So I'll just say 25 for now. Whatever, based on tests, not interested in that. But this is where it gets interesting. So what I can do is I can add in web test 1, which was looking at the job opportunities. And, oh, sorry, I have to actually move them over. I want both my tests, the one with the job opportunities and the one with the news. And I can say that people look at job opportunities 5% of the time, and at you know, the news 95% of the time. Of course, I'd have more in here. So remember what I talked about before about having a realistic mix of scenarios based on web analytics. That's if you want a realistic a performance test on your server or scenario test on your server. Okay, so make it real. Otherwise, I assure you the statistics you get out of this, you know, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't do good planning on these web tests, these statistics are meaningless. You know, I can't really interpret them for you. It's also interesting that we can specify mixes of people coming in at different speeds. Like if you still have people coming in over dial-up on your website, you could, you know, maybe say 5% of users are dial-up. For sake of my example, I'm going to remove that, but, you know, I'm going to assume everybody's on a corporate intranet or something like that. You can also mix up, like, you know, not everyone uses that, so I can do some verification here that it'll work in Chrome or Firefox or different versions of IE or whatnot. So I can also mix up the browser mix, and as I mentioned, I can set up my test computers here and finish that. For sake of time, I'm not going to actually run the load test. I'm just going to show you the output, basically, and show you what we discovered. Oh, God, I felt stupid when we did this. So stress testing is observing the system under performance load. You want to put it under a typical load to validate your architecture. You want to put it under a peak load to validate capacity projections, and then you actually want to put it under maximum load to understand where the bottleneck occurs and if that is sufficient capacity for you online, if like everybody in the city hit the website at the same time or something. So another best practice, by the way, we learned in one of our cities. We actually also did City of Calgary. It's a cool website if you want to go there. We were getting bad performance, but basically we started ripping out all the network pieces like the whatever, the UAG, the firewall, the this, the that. We literally plugged our test lab directly into the server so that then it's discovered, oh, you know what, the servers are performing well. The bottleneck must be somewhere else. Maybe the load balancer was causing some problems. So you want to make sure that first you validate the servers before you back out and validate the network infrastructure. Obviously monitor from a separate computer. And please, if you're going to compare, you need to establish a baseline. So again, the results are meaningless unless you have something to compare them to. And please start your baseline with all performance optimizations off. For example, the publishing infrastructure has built-in caching. Turn it off because you're not going to find your bottlenecks because everything gets cached and everything looks really good. Increase the load in increments, like, step it up and see how much pressure the thing can take before it breaks. Just common pitfalls. I mentioned one about, thinking your computer can do 50,000 concurrent users. It can't. Doing something once is great. Repeating it 1,000,000 times successively is not helpful because you're probably just serving from cache. Create realistic scenarios. And know that you'll eventually run into a bottleneck, but the trick is deciding when it's good enough. When you do apply performance optimizations like caching, apply them one at a time and retest against your baseline because you want to see what improvement that particular optimization makes. And I mentioned the other one about testing direct against the server, so because otherwise you don't know if it's the firewall that's doing something bad for you. So with Lethbridge, so let me finish with discoveries from Lethbridge. This was bad. We thought, okay, well, I'll start doing performance testing. We were just hitting the home page. It was horrible. It was like, I can't believe. Of course, blame SharePoint. It's not me, right? We thought this is horrific. This isn't even performing as well as the old site. And the old site was like on Microsoft Content Management Server. So this was looking bad. So first off, we looked at the website stats. So this is kind of their stats. Yeah, it's a small city and stuff, but reasonable number of things. So we kind of knew what to expect initially, and we built our tests off of this activities. Again, this is the website we were testing. Oh, and notice, for sake of time, the long story short is here. Look at the weather widget. That was actually the culprit. That is getting the weather from the Yahoo Weather Service, and yeah, guess what? The page performs well for one user, but when 10,000 were hitting this concurrently, everybody's going out to Yahoo RSS in real time to go get the updated weather. Well, the weather doesn't update every millisecond, so I guess, small little duh, but head back to the weather web part, throw in some caching so that we only grab the weather update once an hour. Problem was solved, right? So this was the performance before. The system under test here is what the stats are, and as I said, we literally were just hitting the home page and things were horrifyingly bad, right? We implement our optimizations, which were the caching. We enabled lots of things, site collection level, blob caching, ASP.NET caching for the weather service, some other tweaks at the networking level. We did a bunch of things, but then what we were able to do is see the server kind of sort of headed up to about 40% and was kind of leveled out there in terms of serving pages, even though the user load, we kind of maxed out the user load to 100 users here, and we were good. So, we stepped it right up to the maximum and kind of things held there. So, things were good. So I'm going to leave some time for question and answer, or I'll, turn it back over to Jamie's to moderate the questions and see where we take it from here. So you want to take back over, Jamie's?
Sure. I will take back over now, and I see some questions coming in already, so this is good. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to leave you as the presenter just in case there's anything that might be on your screen that might be.
Sure.
Okay. All right, so let's just see what we have here for questions. All right. It's coming up on your screen. First question. Can you see it there?
I have to bring up the panel 1 sec here.
It says the mock-up looks cool. However, what techniques would you advise against testing any out-of-the-box and SharePoint Designer customizations? I am thinking mainly user scenarios, which users can see what, in my case, are currently developing against a semi-live farm.
Yeah, and the mocking stuff is cool, although it only applies to code, right? So I believe, unless I'll even throw it out to Laura if she's still around. I think you're restricted to what you can do with like the recorded web tests type of thing. I think you'd have to verify your scenarios that way. And then the other question I don't have a good answer to either is how you might test SharePoint Designer workflows. Again, I can think of testing the code ones, but not so much the SharePoint Designer.
Yeah, in SharePoint Designer 2010, you'd have to remember to make it a reusable workflow, and then you could move it from site to site, but that is even a tiny bit buggy when I've done that a couple of times. I mean, it's one of those things that they may look pretty and cool, but when going from one server to a completely different server, there's still going to be a couple different things you have to tweak to get it to work right. But only if you make it reusable can you do that.
But that's to deploy. But have you actually been involved with like writing tests against SharePoint Designer stuff, like to verify scenarios, requirements?
Oh, I would just try. That's the way I do it. Is I just try different, or have the users try. Give them a list of fill out a form, make someone go approve it, fill out a different form, make someone go reject it, fill out a, and it would just be a list of things that they would have to try.
Yeah. So they'd be either manual tests, or as I was alluding to, you'd have to use the recorded web test to record the click-through so that you could replay
That's
it.
pretty
That's
cool.
the only way I can think of testing it. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Hope that answers your question, Daniel. And there's also, yes?
Sure, that's not what he wanted to hear, but anyway. So.
All right, I'm sending off another question. This one is coming from Carlos, one of our panelists.
That's not fair, is it?
It says, Ed, what is a typical request per second that a server should adhere to when you are load testing these SharePoint solutions?
Oh boy, yeah. No, there is no, unfortunately, there's no magic number. You can't say request per second equals users. It's a bit of analysis. You have to use because it depends on the scenarios, the custom code, if something is more transactional versus content serving. The raw request per second or pages per second is not, there isn't a number you can multiply it against to get the number of users. So what I'll typically do, and I don't pretend to know, core infrastructure, I'll usually work with one of our infrastructure folks, like I'll bring the results over and we'll work together with some of the network statistics and other things to try and determine that answer. So it's a bit more of an art than a direct number saying multiply request by second by 52 and you get the number of users. So unfortunately it's not a straightforward answer, unfortunately.
All right. We have a couple of questions coming in, so here's another one. This one's in a chat window, and it says, what's your rule of thumb for the effective number of simulated users per workstation? Did I use that question already? I'm confused.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I got a Core i7 with 10 gig of RAM. Absolutely, it is a matter of, okay, so if I go back to see the controllers and agents, This software also monitors the controllers and agents. So what I would really say is if you're getting towards the 80% level on your controller, you've maxed it, or your agent, any one agent, you are maxing it out. The agents are the ones, the controller obviously, because you want to make sure that it's coordinating the right amount of activity, but the agents are the important one. The agents are getting to like 80%. That's the maximum for that computer. And the other thing to watch for, so in addition to maxing out the one computer in terms of number of users, so obviously the more RAM, processor, whatever other capacity you have, the bigger the laptop, the more users it can represent. But please watch. I highly recommend you also have a network sniffer in the network, because you obviously once the network utilization gets above a saturation point, and I think that's around 80% or something. Someone in the networking world can let me know, but there is a percentage point where the network becomes saturated, and basically flooding it with more requests doesn't result in any more traffic hitting the server.
All right. A couple of more questions coming your way. One is from Abheath, and I'm going to send that to you. It says, have you ever noticed any issues using these tools in the non-anonymous claims-based environment?
In a claims-based environment, I actually haven't run it. Oh, I've run it in an intranet, but it happened to be AD authentication. I actually haven't run it officially yet with a claims-based environment like an intranet. So I've done AD authenticated intranet and anonymous websites.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm not really, as long as the authentication works, I'm not expecting a problem.
All right. And the next question would be coming from